Hey everyone, hi, welcome back to my channel. What are we doing today? Today I'm going to be putting on a little bit of makeup while I wrap up all of the books that I read in August. And it was quite the month. A bit of an unusual month for me, but instead of qualifying it or trying to figure it out, let's just get started. So here's the deal, perhaps a little bit of a life update at the very beginning, that this month was a really emotionally draining month. My husband, the whole household, how do I even say it? I feel a little bit blocked up because I want to give context to my reading month, and it's hard to give context without sharing a little bit about my life, which sometimes I feel really open on this channel and sometimes I don't. So I will tell you this, there are a lot of workplace changes. There has been a workplace change that has happened in our lives, the Swearingen household, and that has rendered a lot of things to fling up in the air. And right now we are suspended in midair and looking around and wondering where we're going to land and what kind of moves we want to make for our future, my husband and I and our two boys. And workplace changes are difficult and anxiety provoking, at least for me. I love stability and knowing, like, kind of having that a surety of what's going to happen next, even though I know we can never know the future, and you know, things happen when you're making plans. But because of the emotionally draining nature of this last month or so, I could tell that I was a lot less patient with my books. So when books weren't working out for me, I was vehemently disliking them. And it was probably because a lot of my emotional energy, a lot of my emotional bandwidth was being taken in my real life. Any of you who have had workplace changes and who have encouraging words, I would love to hear those encouraging words. It's just one of those things where it was time to move on for my husband. It was time for him to move forward, and he needed to let go of a workplace that he had been with for a really long time. And that move, again, sort of suspended us into midair, and we're seeing where we're going to land. So with all of that context in mind, I noticed that if I wasn't liking a book, I stopped reading it. And I noticed that if I wasn't liking a book and I continued to read it, it ended up being just horrid. Like I took out my feelings on that book. So I have a huge array of things that I am going to be talking about, books I'm going to be talking about, and they range from books that I did not finish, I DNF'd, to books that were absolutely absorbing and amazing. Okay, so let's actually get started talking about the books. Okay, so I'll start off with the two books I did not finish. I did not finish Beneath the Scarlet Sky by Mark Sullivan, which was a book club pick with the Up to No Good book club. I will leave everyone that's involved in that book club linked down below because a lot of us have channels here on YouTube. And basically I read this and I didn't like it. I couldn't get into it. There was a moment where our main character looks at a woman, and her name's Anna, and decides immediately that he loves her, basically by love at first sight. She even stands him up on a date and he continues to think about her. And to me, that was so unbelievable. I was just like, why are you in love with / your mind is occupied with somebody that you literally do not know, and that I was like, love does not work that way, I don't think. This is not real. And because I was asked to suspend my disbelief with this novel at a time where didn't want to and had no patience for it, I DNF'd it, and I'm so glad about that decision. Another book that I DNF'd was for the Booker. It was Nightcrawling by Leila Mottley. I have talked about this with my friend Fraser in our flops video, which I will leave linked down below. But basically, I, again, couldn't I wasn't buying into the premise of the book, which was that the main character is in a financially precarious situation, and there is some financial tension along with other tensions. She's young, she can't get a job, and she just decides, kind of on a whim or because of a really strange sexual interaction, that she is going to be a woman of the night. And I just wasn't invested in her struggle. I didn't like the main character, and the writing to me was awful. So I did not finish that one either. I'm gonna just run through the 2 Booker books that I did read. I feel like I have either talked about them ad nauseum or the internet at large has talked about them ad nauseum, but they were 2 books that I read this month that did work out for me, and that was Oh William by Elizabeth Strout. I did a review on the Lucy Barton series, which is a really incredible, in my opinion, a really incredible series about the central character Lucy Barton, who came from poverty and an emotionally and physically abusive, well, not physically, an abusive household, let's just say. And it really, Elizabeth Strout, I think the main thing that she explores is the long-term effects of poverty on somebody. And I thought that the first 2 books, My Name is Lucy Barton and Anything is Possible, she is working at that theme of trying to create whole, complex, interesting characters that are living with the effects of poverty. And then I felt like with Oh William, which is the 3rd book in the series, was when she got it right and she knocked it out of the park. I loved it because I quite honestly am still thinking about it today, even though I read it at the very beginning of the month, / even maybe at the end of last month. Okay, and then the other book, Booker book that I really enjoyed, I listened to this on audio, and that was Maddie Mortimer's Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies, which is exploring this idea of grief. The main character, Leah, is diagnosed with cancer, and her prognosis is terrible, and that she takes this opportunity during this time where she is essentially dying to make peace with her past and to grant herself some self-forgiveness and to help build a better and healthier relationship with her daughter. I thought it was great. I have been saying that Maddie Mortimer is 19 years old, and Alice from Alice and the Giant Bookshelf kindly reminded me that that she is, or kindly suggested, and then I looked this up, that Maddie Mortimer is actually 26, which makes a bit more sense to me because I felt like Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies had this emotional gravitas that I was just shocked a 19-year-old could capture. Not that it's not possible, but I was just really kind of like, my jaw was on the floor. And then I was able to kind of pick up my jaw and be like, oh yeah, that makes more sense. A 26-year-old who perhaps has lived a bit more life than a 19-year-old. I know it's kind of a nitpicky thing, but for me it made more sense that she was a tiny bit older. But because of the compliment that the Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies was really emotionally deep and was able to explore themes in a really incredible way, in a really effective way. And I was just, again, very impressed by the age of the author. I'm actually segueing into the Yikes, Not For Me category, and I'm going to start off with another Booker book that didn't work out for me, and that was After Sappho by Selby Wynne Schwartz. What Schwartz tries to do, or attempts to do in this novel, is to give a voice to Sappho, who is an ancient poet, and there are only Sappho fragments out there. There isn't whole pieces. And so Selby Wynne Schwartz uses that premise to try and illuminate and fill out the voice of Sappho as well as other lesbians throughout history. What I didn't like about this is that this is written basically in fragments. I'll actually show you. So every few paragraphs there would be a new heading on the page, and then a few paragraphs that follow. and it read like museum placards that were disconnected and had an overarching theme of giving voice to lesbians who have been silenced in the past. And though I loved the premise, and though I kept on trying to get invested in this book over and over again, it didn't work for me. There was no climax. There was hardly any character development. It just felt like I was reading a bunch of fragments for like 275 pages. So yeah, not for me. My second book that falls under the Yikes, not for me category, I feel quite bad about because I feel like this book is a booktube darling and I really disliked it. I read it with Kim in middle of the book mart, and she did such a great job articulating why this book didn't work for her, and I agreed with her in every single point. And that is This Tender Land by William Kent Krueger. This tells the story of Odie, who is sent to an Indian training school, which is what Kent Krueger calls it, and it is about the atrocities in that school. But very quickly, Odie decides to hop on a boat with his friends and take a journey downriver in escape from this school and the superintendent from that school. This book didn't work for me on a bunch of different levels. I originally thought that we were going to explore the boarding school in a lot of ways, or the training school, and we didn't. It also was weird that it was an Indian training school, but the main character is a white boy, and the story is about him, so the training school kind of felt like just a plot beat. And I thought we were going to get more about the school and what the school was. So that was definitely a me problem. But then as we are exiting the school and going on this adventure, you initially get this tension that it is a cat and mouse chase. Like the superintendent or the leader of the school is coming and trying to catch Odie and his friends. But that he doesn't develop that tension at all, and really you don't even see that main villain show up hardly throughout the entire plot beats. So that tension that was initially there ends up kind of fading. So then I was like, okay, so it's not about the tension, it's not about the training school. So then Odie is having an existential crisis about what is God and who is God and what does God do in our lives. And so I was like, great, I will get invested in Odie's existential struggle. But then that ends up deflating, and it's not even about that. And then at the end, there are so many plot twists and turns that I couldn't even have guessed or weren't even alluded to, that like at the end I was like, what was this book? It felt like an adventure story, kind of. It felt like a story of friendship, sort of. It felt like an existential crisis, partially. And so I don't know, I think I probably expected this to be a bit more literary than it was. I think I expected it to be a little bit different than what it was. And then basically on a bunch of different levels, it did not work for me. And yeah, I will leave Kim's channel linked down below in her review because it was fantastic. And Kim provided such incredible conversation. We lamented about disliking this book together, and I really appreciated having someone to talk to about why this book didn't work for me at all. Now I'm going to be talking about the books that were very mixed for me, and I'm going to start off with Possession by A.S. Byatt. I read this with Jack the Rambling Raconteur, who is an incredible person and reader and reviewer here on BookTube. I also read this with my friend Fraser, because Fraser and I apparently read basically everything together. And here's the deal. I love the premise of this. So the premise is that two academics are bonding, a male and a female, are bonding over this mystery. And the mystery is, did two Victorian poets who seemingly didn't know each other, were they actually in love, and did they have a relationship? Byatt is an incredible author. She created a bunch of primary documents, journals, letters, poetry, short stories in the style of the Victorians in order to create source material that these academics are looking at. I loved that it was two dual timeline, right? Dual storylines, because you have the poets and if they were actually lovers, and then you have the academics and what they're going through and the tension between their lives. And here's the deal. I got through about 2/3 of this, and I realized that I was starting to lose interest in the story because the primary documents were really quite long, and to me they eventually got kind of tedious. I felt like I was reading for class, and I don't like that feeling. And so instead, what initially had excited and charmed me about this book, which was all of these really cool like poems and an analysis and these journals and getting the interiority of like past figures because you're reading their diaries and letters. Eventually that just kind of wore on me, and I was like, can't we just speed this up a little bit? It got a bit tiresome, and eventually I was just like, A.S. Byatt, you girl, you a bit snooty. You a bit uppity. Yeah, you're kind of pretentious, and I really wish that she would have acknowledged her pretension and like came down to earth and been like, I know that this is a lot. And you know, kind of like played with that idea or like made fun of her pretension. I think for me it would have like popped some of the tension that I was feeling with the author. But she doesn't do that, and so really by the end I was not super invested in the characters, and I really just wanted this this book to be over with. So it was I would say the first 2/3 I enjoyed, and the last third I was like, I could have taken it or left it. Another book that I felt quite mixed about is another BookTube darling, and I read it with as a read-along with AJ Dunn Reads and Writes. I will leave their channel link down below, and it is AJ's favorite book, which also pains me to talk about it in this way, and that is Where the Red Fern Grows. I thought, I think I walked into this book assuming that I wouldn't know anything about it, and I would be really surprised and delighted by the story. And then I got in there and I realized that I know this story. I think this book was read to me as a child. I know I have seen the movie. I know Where the Red Fern Grows. Like, I know it all. And so I think that this idea of discovery and like falling in love with a story, it just didn't work for me. It didn't, I just wasn't really invested in the main character's struggle, and I think it's because like I already knew it. I already knew what was gonna happen, and because I was already having a very emotional month, I didn't want to feel emotionally destroyed. So I wonder if I was like pushing the story away because I didn't want to get invested, because I know what happens in the end. If you don't know what happens in the end, I'm definitely not going to spoil it for you, but if you know, you know. And so yeah, so I think that this was definitely more of a me thing than the book thing, and I'm just bummed that it didn't quite work for me. And then my last book that I felt quite mixed about was the fan fiction that I read for Garb August, and that was All the Young Dudes by Miss King Bean 89. So here's the deal about All the Young Dudes. If you are somebody who grew up with Harry Potter but won't revisit those works for personal reasons, then this is a really fun read. But that's where it ends. Like that's where it ends. The plot beats are, so what you're doing is you're following the Marauders era, which is Harry Potter's father's era. So James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter, and the way that they are pranksters and their life at Hogwarts and thereafter. And the thing is that I think that this book was written, Miss King Bean 89 wanted to hang out with those characters and created a really fun dynamic between them and other characters in the books. And that was all that her writing could offer. There are like, it's you know, written poorly in some ways. Like there's the, what is it? Like the formatting is completely off. And there are like misplaced periods. There are words that are not used correctly. There are plot holes. The same plot beats are done over and over and over again. And she absolutely can't write action. But there was something really warm and cozy about being back in the Hogwarts world in a new and fresh way. I tried to reread Harry Potter and I just can't get into it for a lot of different reasons, but I genuinely come to it and like, I'm going to reread the Harry Potter series, and then it ends up not being that. So it was really cool to revisit the world in this capacity, in the capacity of fan fiction that is LGBTQIA friendly, or LGBTQ plus, oh gracious, that is friendly for everybody. It was really cool to revisit Harry Potter in a way that is inclusive and that is for everybody. But yeah, it's not one that I would reread. It's hard to recommend. But shockingly, Heidi at my reading life, she got sucked down this rabbit hole and she read the whole thing. And I was like, wow. So, I mean, it's readable, it's fun, but you have to approach it as if it is truly garbage and you're reading it just for the fun of it. There are 3 books that I am calling yays. And that worked for me. One of which I started a couple months ago for the Women's Prize, and that is The Bread the Devil Need by Lisa Allen-Agostini. I started this and then I got really busy with other things, and then one day I was like, I'm gonna finish that book, and I sat down and I finished it, and it was great. It is a domestic noir that follows a main character who has had a history of abuse and is currently in an abusive relationship. And it is really a story of discovery, of hope. There are times where it is brutal, but I was rooting for this main character, and I really enjoyed her, and I enjoyed the world that Lisa Allen-Agostini created, and I thought it was just a really good read. And I kind of regret putting off finishing it until this month, but I'm really glad that I did. The next yay was a buddy read that I did with Gloria Z. Thompson and Tiffany at Beautiful and Minutia. I was like thinking, this is what happens when three girls who grew up with religion read a book about religion. Like, we had so much to say about it. There was so much to discuss and talk about, and that is Barbara Kingsolver's The Poisonwood Bible. This follows the Price family, who spend a year in the Congo, and they are it's set in the 1960s, I believe, and they are they're from the South. They're from Georgia, this family that has 4 girls, a mother and a father, and the whole family picks up and moves to the Congo in order to spread the word of God to the Congolese people. So this story is told in 4 voices, the voices of, 5 voices, mostly 4 voices, but the voices of the women in the story. And here's what I loved about it. There was so much wordplay on biblical themes, it was just so delightful. Like, little Ruth May, she goes, Mount Sinai, instead of Mount Sinai. And, you're just these little things that I think, or I would assume, if you didn't grow up in a Bible believing household, it might be lost on you. But since myself and my buddy readers grew up in Christian households, it was like, we just kept on like pointing out the little things that were funny, irreverent, done wrong, were little word plays on biblical ideas, themes, and like, phrases. So I just really liked that. The story is incredibly strong. So you have 4 perspectives. You have Leah, the tomboy; Rachel, the sort of prissy, girly girl; Ada, who is really smart but is living with a disability, which really affects the outlook, her outlook on the world. And then you have little Ruth May, who's 5 years old, and they're describing the Congo. They all have extremely distinct voices, and ultimately they tell a really compelling story about their experience there. Here's the deal. After the climax of this book, and shortly after, like 20 or 30 page after that, the final climax of the book lost steam for me. So the last 120 pages, it was a little bit more about the lives of these women, what happens to them throughout their lives, and more about the politics of the Congo. and I just had a difficult time being invested in that side of the story. And so I would say that like four-fifths of this book was fantastic, like really, really good. And then you got to that last fifth and I was just like, I don't know, I'm just not invested. I'm done. Which was okay because I mean, the first 4/5 were so good. I would go back and reread that part and then just stop when I felt like I was done, which is kind of an interesting experience. I don't think I've quite had an experience like that with reading a book where so much of it was so good and then the last bit was a bit of I don't know if my camera battery died before or after me saying that the experience was strange because it was so good up until that last bit, which was quite the letdown. Okay. Moving on. Okay, the last yay for me was my first romance. I'm not a romance reader and I decided to try romance for Garb August, where we adventured into trash during the month of August. And here's the deal. So here's what I read. I read Beyond Scandal and Desire. I listened to this on audio rather, and it's by Lorraine, Heath, and I was so entertained. I could see absolutely why the romance readers out there love this genre, because for the most part, you are playing on tropes that you know and love. So for this story is all about Mick True Love. So one of the things about garbage, even though I really am very hesitant to say anything is garbage, but let's call this like a palate cleanser. But one of the markers of garbage in these conversations was that the author is in on the joke. And Lorraine Heath, she's in on the joke. I mean, her main guy is called Mick True Love, y'all. And of course he sees a girl way out of his league and he has other things going on about his past that he wants to resolve. And then of course he wants to get the girl in question, but for all the wrong reasons. And, incidentally, love ensues. And, things happen and the plot, kind of goes from there. It was just so much fun. It was one of those fun reads that you knew, or at least I knew I was going to get a happy ending, and that was wonderful. And it was really fun to be in a world that was over the top in some ways. Like, the premise of the story was just so cheesy, but it was cheesy in a way that made me laugh, and it made me feel like Lorraine Heath did it because she knew it was cheesy, and it made a great premise for a romance novel. And I just really got the sense that Lorraine Heath knew what she was doing, and she was in on the joke, and that she was writing for people who love this genre, who want a bit of a ridiculous plot and a lot of twists and turns and character development in a very specific way, where the main character falls in love with the main girl, and then of course there is conflict, and then the conflict is resolved. And for having the month that I've had, it was really the perfect palate cleanser for me. It was brain candy. It was wonderful. And yeah, I can't speak highly enough of this, and I would love to listen to another one of her books in this series, because this is a series. Okay, so we've gotten to the favorites of the month. If you want to hear me converse with my friend Fraser, I talked about all of these books with him, but I will definitely recap them, talk about them here as well. So, and I'll leave our video that I talked with him, I'll leave the video in which I spoke with Fraser linked down below. Words are hard. All right, so the first book is Stag's Leap by Sharon, which is a poetry collection by this wonderful confessional poet, and boy does she confess. So what happens is that it starts off when her husband announces to her that he wants a divorce. And she spends the rest of the book exploring the relationship that she had with her ex-husband and who she was in that relationship. The wonderful thing about this is that I felt like every word, every poem, every page was dripping with truth. I was so just awed by her vulnerability and her honesty. And this came to me at a day that I was having a really rough day. And I was just so excited to be sucked up in her world and in her thoughts and in her vulnerability, because it was just a really like soothing balm for my own sort of turmoil and sadness. Similarly, Mary Oliver, American Primitive, another poetry collection. This is my first Mary Oliver poetry collection, and I picked this up because of the Naturalist book club, which is ran by Heidi at My Reading Life and Doris at All D Books. This is last month, rather, they focused on Mary Oliver, and I had this poetry collection, and so I finished it in August to celebrate with them. And I just loved this. So here's the bit that I found really moving and really touching and spoke to me in the moment that I needed it most, which was why it became a favorite. Though all of these poems are beautiful, and I'm sure that as I revisit this poetry book throughout my life, that I will pick up on different parts depending on where I'm at. But this was the moment where I was like, I love this poetry collection. So she says, to live in this world, you must be able to do 3 things. To love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it. And when the time comes, to let it go, And I just loved this. I felt like it was a beautiful celebration of nature. It was so thoughtful. It was so meticulously done. Yeah, just wonderful. And this will not be the end of my relationship with Mary Oliver. And then the final favorite of the month was one that I was excited to get to. I've bought a bunch of her books and I'm so glad that it worked out. But it is Elena Ferrante, My Brilliant Friend, which was translated from the Italian. I guess I could have read this for Women in Translation. We'll say that I read it for Women in Translation. It was translated by Anne Goldstein. So this tells the story of the main character Elena, or Lenu, and her time living in this very teeny tiny neighborhood in Italy, and this covers her childhood, and she's mostly exploring her friendship with her friend Leila, who is rebellious and has her own mindset and her own viewpoint on the world that is very different than basically all of the women living in this town. She is what I would call a rebel, and it's really interesting because the story is told through the eyes of Lenu, who is looking back on her life and explaining her childhood to the reader. And as she does that, I feel like she is trying to both contextualize and understand Leila, and also try to understand herself and their friendship and the whole neighborhood at large. Okay, now this is like 100% a character-driven novel. It is all about the characters, and let me tell you, I was invested in Lenu. I loved her. She is a little bit awkward. She's bookish. She doesn't think she's super great. She compares herself a lot to her friend, and she always is like, my friend is better. She's smarter, she's prettier, she's got more sass, and I'm just trying to be out here and basically try and keep up. And she has a lot of insecurities and a lot of things that she needs to work through, and I really identified with that. I really was invested in Lenu's struggle, which I think was one of the reasons why this book was so impactful for me. And then consequently, because I was basically falling in love with our narrator and her voice, as she speaks about others that she cares about, I started caring about those characters as well. So not only did I care about her and Leila and her friendship with Leila, but then I was starting to care about literally everyone in the neighborhood. And the whole story is about the neighborhood and the way that it changes and the way that it runs and who has power and who doesn't. And I mean, it just twists and turns. And yeah, I just loved it. Yeah, I just loved it. And actually the end ends on a cliffhanger, which normally I wouldn't care for in a book. I just want the book to just wrap up, but I was like, ah! And immediately I picked up the next book, which is The Story of a New Name, and started reading that as well, because I had to know how the cliffhanger resolved. So the Ferrante magic worked on me. I loved it and would highly recommend it, especially if you are a very character-driven reader and would tend to probably identify with somebody who is a bit insecure, a bit bookish, a bit mousy, a bit like, you know, unsure of herself. Yeah, I loved it. I just loved it. And that's it. So tell me, what did you read in August? What was good? What wasn't good? Tell me, did you pick up any Booker books? I would love to know. And yeah, that's it for me. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye, guys.